scared. Alone. The journey has never been more treacherous for this young warrior. He will have to push through extraordinary challenges in order to level up. Everything that resides in this jungle is looking for one thing and one thing only: to make this orc into their next snack. He has seen hundreds of his kind slain by the rival faction. For in this punishing jungle, only the strongest will survive. But at what cost? Another beautiful journey into Stranglethorn. You know what, guys? I'm actually pretty optimistic this time around. I'm sure everything is going to be just fine. Two of them! Oh, you son of a... So anyone who has ever had the experience of leveling in Stranglethorn Vale on a PvP server knows exactly what ends up happening. Generally, you start off with a pure soul. You're not looking to cause anyone any trouble. You're just hoping to try and get through your quests. Kill a few mobs, discover a few new areas, and maybe if you're lucky, even grab a few new pieces of gear upgrades. And then hopefully you're on your way to the next zone. But what inevitably ends up happening is you fall into a hellish descent into chaos and madness that's fueled by a hatred that burns hotter than 1,000 suns. Okay, well, maybe that's just me. Anywho, after arriving in Stranglethorn Vale via Zeppelin from Orgrimmar, I was sent on a quest to kill some raptors that were attacking the horde settlement of Gromgul. A task that proved to be simple enough. I noticed immediately how much stronger I had gotten since the last time we were in the jungle. And everything seemed to be going fine, until I ran into this over-leveled duo of rogues who promptly gave me an all-in-one inclusive trip to the spirit realm. Now, after making my little journey back to the scene of the crime and reviving, I immediately spotted that same dwarf rogue running in my direction, and I knew what was going to happen. I knew that I was going to be jumped by his lover in a matter of seconds, and I had no choice but to start the fight. Now, as the inevitable stunlock fest began, a troll rogue unsuccessfully tried to come to my aid. The higher level dwarf and myself seemed to be fairly evenly matched. We were handing in blow for blow, cooldown for cooldown. But when the troll returned to the shadows and left me alone, the human and dwarf 2v1'd me, which resulted in me once again being sent to the spirit realm. After about 5 or so minutes, I made my way over to Nessingwary's camp in the northern section of Stranglethorn.
Hello.
After arriving at the camp, I turned in all the quests that had sent me to meet with the legendary outdoorsman. And just as I was going to embark on my new set of quests, a literal warband of Alliance scum advanced on my location, using their numbers game to whittle down my health pool and once again send me back to the spirit realm. After another corpse run, thankfully not too far away, I did sneak off into the shoreline of Stranglethorn to slay some of the trolls for their tusks. And this is where I joined forces with the rogue, Putrilda. After working together and relinquishing the trolls of their tusks, Putrilda and I joined forces with a mage named Mucky, and we began by decimating the rival groups of Alliance that we ran into. We then went on our separate ways, as I returned to Gromgul to hand in the completed quests. After leaving Gromgul, I went back to slaying various jungle inhabitants. I decided it was time to put the life of war behind me. Maybe lay low, and try and keep making progress, and hopefully leave this jungle sooner rather than later. Yeah, that pacifism lasted for like 5 seconds until I stalked this poor mage. Thankfully, I'm pretty sure this guy was a bot, so I'm actually not the bad guy here, I think. Then, after single-handedly killing off much of the native younger tiger and panther population, I turned in my quests at Nessingwary's camp. I then proceeded to kill this poor rogue as he was questing because fuck rogues, first off, and two, at this point in time, my heart is completely turned black and I feel nothing but hate. I'm basically like the Grinch, but instead of Christmas, I hate the Alliance. Like, I didn't even feel bad when this little fella let out a whimper as he was cut down. Ironically, it was mere moments later when fate would see that a rogue named Nut Dump attempted to do the same thing to me. Luckily, a warlock and a mage were around and decided to save this warrior from certain death. After giving Nut Dump a case of the blue balls, I then turned my focus onto the mature panther and tiger population, trying to cut down their numbers as well, until the outdoor boys truly saw me fit to be a world-renowned hunter. At this point, I was also tasked by him and himself to take care of the local raptor population. Eventually, after taking care of the overabundance of the raptors, tigers, and panthers, it was time for me to hand in all 3 of these quests at Nessingwary's camp, then resulting in me being tasked with killing much higher level elite variants of all of these species, something that would require me to be much stronger than I was currently. This meant that it was time for us to say goodbye to the jungles for the time being, and head back to the continent of Kalimdor. And guess what? The Alliance even decided to throw me a going away party! How nice of them! After leaving the jungles, it was time for us to return to the depressing lands of Desolace. This time I ended up joining forces with my buddy who was on his disc priest. With his heals and my muscles, the Alliance was about to be in a world of hurt, my friends. Now, we started off our adventure together by slaying the massive spirit of a demon that was being summoned by the dastardly Burning Blade clan. We haven't seen much of them since we put a stop to them all the way back in ROC. Hey, look guys, I ran into pirates off... Okay, I'm sorry, that's been done before and that's pretty mean, I'm sorry. After banishing that demon back to hell, it was time for us to banish another demon back to hell in the form of this level 44 Alliance Warlock. I mean, what was I to do? She came strolling up behind us, flaunting her mount. Of course I had to try and knock her down a few pegs, which she clearly wasn't prepared for the fight. I mean, I don't blame her. She's probably not used to being attacked by people who are 10 levels below her. And she made the mistake of trying to attack us both instead of just focusing on one of us one at a time, which culminated in both of us surviving and defeating her with half health by the time we were able to finish her off. Now, after ridding the world of 2 demons, we felt very proud of what we've been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time here in Desolace. It was then time for us to take on the swimming quest portions of Desolace. I'm not gonna lie, I may or may not have died not paying attention to my breath once or twice. Now, once we reached the far island off the coast, I spotted this druid from underneath the water, like I was a part of SEAL Team 6. This poor druid stood absolutely no chance against us, especially with a mob attacking her. And after ridding the world of one more alliance, we then grabbed what we came for, Rackmore's treasure, which marked the first time that a quest reward has been over a gold. We then continued our work around Desolace, killing multiple quest NPCs in the form of Burning Blade priestesses, Centaur war chiefs, and Naga lords. We even took on this level 39 elite giant, strictly just because. We tore up the entire zone, killing every alliance that we came across, eventually stumbling across what we were 99% convinced was a bot. I mean, look at how he reacts every single time he respawns right next to us after we killed him, which ended up being like 4 or 5 different times, to the point where we honestly just got bored of killing him and we let him go back to his evil botting ways. But we didn't leave before we decided to take on this extremely geared level 42 rogue after she strolled in and took over our questing zone without even asking. She did put up one hell of a fight, even managing to kill my poor priestly friend. Thankfully, I was able to avenge him and send her on a nice little corpse walk across Desolace. After finishing off the majority of the quests in this zone, and the Alliance population to boot, it was time for us to call it a night. At this point, we were almost level 38, and we had actually reached the goal of 100 gold, which meant we had all the money required for our first mount. At level 37, we now had access to the next wing of Scarlet Monastery, which was the armory. Arguably the most important of all the wings when it came to gearing up my warrior. With the armory only having one boss, Herod, the Scarlet Champion, and his loot pool consisting of 4 items with literally all 4 of them being upgrades over my current gear set. The downside though being he only drops 1 at a time, which meant it was time to farm a lot. But before we set off to Tearsfall to go and kill those zealots, we made a quick pit stop in Orgrimmar to grab some warrior training and first aid training. 2 things that I put off for honestly far too long, and we finally grabbed my much awaited new skill, Whirlwind. After paying quite a bit of gold for my new skills, I finally made my way back to the monastery. It didn't take too long to find a group, which is one of the few perks that I do enjoy as a tank. The layout of this dungeon is incredibly straightforward and rather simple. Basically, just hack and slash your way through the mobs in a straight line. I definitely did notice the difficulty of the mobs increasing as we made our way below, especially once we faced these mobs who were constantly disarming me, which meant that my ability to hold aggro went to essentially 0. Thankfully, everyone in the group played well, and eventually we made our way to a sealed door which held behind it the Scarlet Champion himself. The sole owner of so many important gear upgrades like the Ravager Axe and his shoulders, which I mean, come on, look how sexy those things are. This was also the first time that I had faced a boss with an actual boss mechanic, other than just tank and spank. After avoiding his whirlwinds and his quite annoying voice lines, we decimated the champion's health pool, and he fell before us. And he dropped the Scarlet Leggings, a massive upgrade over the Quest green legs we've been rocking for a very long time at this point. I was beyond excited when I hit need on the dice, not noticing that the shaman had also rolled need for them. And wouldn't you know it, boys? I rolled a frickin' 2, which meant my brand new leggings were now going to be sitting in the level 36 shaman's bags for days. Feels bad, boys. Feels bad. Oh well, you win some, you lose some. Over the course of the next couple hours, I would go on to farm Arathi over and over, chasing each and every one of his various drops. In between these successful runs, the unthinkable happened. Everything was going great. We were making our way to the end of the dungeon just like every other time before, until I happened to look over at the doors to Herod's chamber, and, well, they were already open. That's horrible. Oh. Yep. I forgot to reset the dungeon that just took us 20 minutes to get to the end of. Well, needless to say, that was pretty embarrassing, boys. Now, after leaving and actually remembering to reset this time, we were after the last and final piece of the Herod puzzle. The puzzle I was actually most excited about. His sexy-ass shoulders. Which is kind of ironic, considering they have the highest drop rate of any of his gear. But, thankfully, on this run, they actually dropped. Which meant that we were finished with the armory. The runs actually ended up getting us all the way from level 37 up to 38, and halfway to level 39. It was time for us to get back to questing, boys. Ah, the Arathi Highlands. What a complete contrast to the depressing grayscape that was Desolace. Here we joined forces once again with my Disc Priest buddy, and we embarked on the largest slaughter of Alliance forces I've personally ever seen. The journey started off like any other, with us arriving in Hammerfall and grabbing a bunch of quests, but right after we got out of town, we were welcomed into a literal shitstorm frenzy of mobs that were going wild. Apparently, someone handed in a quest that had a giant elemental army spawning around this colossal-sized elite mob. It honestly looked like a world boss fight with elementals spamming fireballs and frost novas at everyone. I tried my best at holding the colossal's attention as people worked on killing all the ads until eventually, with the unlikely help of this night elf warrior, she was slain. Now, the Arathi Highlands may as well be called the Arathi Badlands, for the amount of times that we ran into hunter bots that were grinding on random mobs. I mean, who goes to mend your pet as you're being attacked? After killing this bot, we then moved on to the Northfold Manor, where we were required to kill syndicates for their blood amulets. Almost immediately upon arriving, I had to lay the smackdown on this human mage. After finishing her off, it was time to finish the second mage that had decided to come in off the ledge like some sort of action hero. And let's just say, it didn't go too well for her either. Now, this was not the last that we would see of her, and I could tell right away something wasn't right about this. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as I charged, she pulled off a nice blink, which nullified my distance closer. And that's when this little Nobe monster appeared. She started slicing and dicing into my teammate's backside, turning his poor defenseless booty into mincemeat, while I was powerless to stop them from my polymorph state. 50%. 40%, 30%. I watched as his health bar started falling more and more, and with one last valiant move, he dispelled my polymorph. As Ratscallion was busy laughing and jumping around, not taking me seriously, she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated what a warrior can do when he has a full bar of rage and doesn't know when to give up. And right around the time she realized this, it was too late. This meant that it was just me and the mage left. As I made my way closer to her, I did my best to try and time a quick first aid in between her beams, allowing me just a sliver of health left after she used up the last of her mana. This was it. The person who made the next attack was going to win it all. She came closer to dead range my gun and attempted an ice block to regain a little mana, to likely cast a fire blast that would send me to the spirit realm, which then gave me ample time to leave combat, eat some food, and regain some health, which meant her next fire blast was not going to be enough to finish me, leaving her only one choice: to run. But it was too late. She ran herself right into another mob, which meant she was now sent to the grave with a nice repair bill. At this point, we decided to be nice and keep working on questing and let the Alliance be for now. So we headed into the Strom Keep in order to hunt down these elusive sigils from these level 37 and 38 elites. And as we were there, fighting off the elites, I noticed a druid and a warrior who were likely doing the same thing as us. So I gave them a friendly wave to let them know that this is not a good spot for any of us to get into a fight right now, and we didn't want any trouble. And of course, they showed their true colors. What happened next was a level 38 and 35 absolutely taking it to these two level 41s. After just completely outworking these guys and using coordination and better employment of our skill set, we were whittling down their health pools and even forced the level 41 warrior to use a health potion to try and stack the advantage even higher in their favor. Thankfully, I was able to put an end to the warrior in a 2v1 situation right after they had finished off my teammate. Now, it was a 1v1 with the druid, and as soon as I popped retaliation, his health pool was immediately cut down into half, forcing him to try and run away for a heal like a coward. I then tried to pop off a quick bandage, but he stops me with a moonfire, which allowed me the time to escape while he tried to stay behind and rebirth his teammate. This meant that I was out of cooldowns, and I had two higher level alliance that were swiftly on my tail. I had to think of something quick, boys, or I was definitely a goner. So I made a quick play to jump atop the keep's higher levels and try my hand at hiding and playing a rogue. And wouldn't you frickin' know it, boys, they fell for it. This meant it was time for us to regroup and strategize a way to take care of these guys once and for all. And sure enough, eventually, we had our opportunity. They were preoccupied with two ogres, and I knew it was time. It was now, or with a few quick slices, I let the ogres do the finishing shots to add a little insult to injury to give them a nice little durability loss. After farming the syndicates for over an hour, we were sigilless and tired, and we did decide to give up, and we made our way back to Hammerfall to call it a night. It was a new day, and with it, another opportunity for a new adventure, my friends. So today, it was time to do something that I've been putting off doing for a while now, and head our way into Razorfen Downs, a dungeon that holds one of classic WoW's coolest weapons, Excalibur. And it also has a plate helmet, which would be my very first piece of plate gear after hitting level 40 on the warrior. So that's pretty cool, but seriously, Excalibur. Now, let it be known that Excalibur only drops from a rare boss that doesn't even always spawn, and it only has a 14% drop rate off that said rare boss. So the chances are that I don't even receive this sword, but god dang it, we're gonna give it a try, boys. So we made our way through the treacherous, thorny overgrowth, killing every little piglet in sight, until eventually we were at the start of the dungeon. Slowly but surely, our ragtag group of adventurers pulverized every piglet and undead mob as we made our way through this big fen. Until there he was, Raggleschnout. He actually spawned on our first run, and he was holding my Excalibur. I was beyond giddy. This was it, my friends. I could feel it. We put an onslaught onto his health meters until he fell, dead in front of us. And there it was. Nope, it was the belt. But hey, I did end up winning it, so I'm not totally pissed. But nevertheless, we pressed onward until we had reached what was quite possibly the coolest of all the bosses that we faced up until now. And his appearance wasn't the only impressive thing. During the fight, when he wasn't casting some mega damage frost bolts at my face, he was also summoning an assload of mobs that were tearing apart the group faster than I could grab aggro. Even with two healers, I still had to sacrifice my life to ensure the team's survival. A risk that every tank knows can happen whenever they step into a dungeon. But the group survived, and we were able to send the Lich back to the graveyard, but not before he talked some serious shit as we died. Like, what a fucker. Anyway, he was dead, and wouldn't you know it, boys, my helm dropped. And with that, our first run of RFD was completed. Now it was time for us to farm this place just a couple more times because I frickin' want Excalibur. And on the third one, we actually remembered to activate and finish the escort quest inside the dungeon. And upon completion of the quest, we had dinged to level 40, boys. This meant that it was time for us to get back to Orgrimmar, learn how to wear this badass new plate helmet, and finally get our mount. After arriving in Orgrimmar, I could barely contain my excitement to get my hands on my first mount, guys. So of course, I raced there first thing, and once there, I had a hard decision of just exactly which species of wolf that I was going to go with. The choice was actually fairly easy once I thought about it, because the timber and the brown wolf barely had any distinction between the two, whereas the dire wolf just kind of stood out to me the most. So with my trusty new wolf companion picked out and purchased, we had honestly accomplished one of the biggest milestones on the warrior. And experience-wise, we were actually closing in on halfway to level 60. It was time for us to return return back to Arathi Highlands and get back to questing for a bit. Now, once again back in the Highlands, I was killing a villainous band of trolls when I stumbled upon this night elf hunter who was preoccupied in a fight of his own. So obviously I charged in to try and send his butt back into the spirit realm, and things were going good. Then he slams a health potion and he's back up to full health. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see this little paladin come strolling in to make it a 2v1 situation. Now clearly, they don't know who they're messing with. So immediately I pop an intimidating shout to try and put some distance between us, and I saw the paladin drooling at the thought of killing me as she gave chase. All it took was one quick retaliation and a crit, and I sent her ass packing to the spirit realm, giving her some needed time to think about her actions. Now after searching for the hunter, I actually stumbled back upon the paladin, and I couldn't help myself but stir up the shit once again. This time she was putting up a hell of a fight, especially after drinking a health potion. However, with a quick hamstring, I was able to get valuable distance on her and pull off a couple bandages. This was invaluable as she came in swinging with a hard crit, and things weren't looking good for us boys. That was until she started laughing at me after just guzzling down a health potion. It was like the gods heard her injustices and smiled down upon me, their blessings in the form of a nice critical hit execute to put her down in the dirt. And I gave her a little memorial to help her find her body after a nice little corpse run. But you know what, guys? Not all paladins are bad. I actually had an interesting interaction with one shortly after who was able to speak to me somehow. It did feel like I was speaking with someone whose third language was English, but nevertheless, I got the gist of it and what she was trying to say. Unfortunately, our interactions were brief, as she logged off before our friendship even had time to blossom. And not even a couple moments later, as I was working my way deeper into the kobold-filled cave, I ran into this rogue, who was also decimating these nasty little buggers. I decided on a more diplomatic approach, because I knew that a fight here more than likely was going to end in mutually assured destruction. So it was best to play nice and work together. Stranglethorn may have changed me, but I'm not an idiot, at least not all the time. Together we were able to quickly take care of the remaining kobolds and reach the crystal for the quest tournament. It was time for us to go and kill a bunch of ogres that were held up inside the Stromgarde keep. Now these weren't just any regular ogres. These big bees were level 37 elites, which meant I could only take on one at a time, which was A, very inefficient, and B, almost impossible because of how tightly packed together they were. Thankfully, when I arrived, there was a group of hordes that were already going to town on their numbers, so I joined in and gave them a helping hand. Big shout out to these guys for sticking around and helping me finish my remaining kills, as I was pretty late to the party. Had they have left when they were done, it would have meant I still had 14 or so ogres to have to contend with by myself. Eventually we took down the last ogre, and it meant it was time for us to return to Hammerfall to hand in the quest. This also meant that it was time for us to say goodbye to the group, and goodbye to Arathi Highlands, and head to a place that I don't know if I've ever quested in before. It was time to visit the Badlands. And boys, my arrival in the Badlands started off quite strange. As soon as I entered the zone, I was welcomed with a familiar face. It was Aline. If you guys watched the previous episode, you know Aline was a level 35 hunter that I faced off against in Thousand Needles. Except, she must have been quite busy because now she was a skull to me. Thank God, she must not have recognized me, which kind of hurt my feelings, or else she would have surely killed me. Especially after I may or may not have antagonized her. But as we went our separate ways, I had arrived at my first encampment to grab the first set of Badlands quests. And wow, it was absolutely overrun with alliance stench when I arrived. And wouldn't you know it, another familiar face. Look who it was, the now level 42 Night Elf warrior that tried and failed to kill me and my friend earlier in Strom Keep. Now he must have learned his lesson because we were able to go our separate ways without any tiffs this time around. And before I knew it, I had arrived at the main questing hub in the Badlands, and it was time to start the grind. I'll be honest boys, my time in the Badlands were mostly spent fighting the Alliance, with a little bit of questing sprinkled in here and there. I'm going to use the age-old excuse children have been using since the dawn of time. They started it. And 99% of the time, guys, it was true. I would be questing, I'd be killing rock elementals for their shards, and out of nowhere, a level 50 hunter would attack me. Literally 100 feet away from the horde encampment. Like, get out of here, bro. This is our territory. So as I returned to my body, it was no surprise to see I wouldn't be waiting too long for revenge, as a couple of rogues were already destroying them right before my eyes. Apparently, she attacked a level 60 as he was strolling by. What a complete moron! Now after taking out the remaining alliance in the area, it was finally time for us to move on and go kill some trogs. And as I was killing some trogs, I heard this mage mumble under his breath that this hunter and I were apparently morbidly obese horde scum. Now, with the afternoon I was having, I wasn't gonna let it go. So you guys can probably guess what happened next. After delivering some well-deserved punishment to the mage, once or twice, or maybe a few times, I moved on and I joined up with a hunter who had spotted the ogre, Thorgrun, and his band of misfits. I do find the extremely scaled-down model of this one ogre to be absolutely hilarious, by the way. Anyway, with his little entourage surrounding him, I knew that this was going to be an extremely tricky situation for us. My plan was to let him aggro onto me as his group went past while I was still mounted, so that the hunter had time to lay into him while I feared the remaining group and we could run away with the quest item. And honestly, guys, it worked fairly well. I managed to pull off a sneaky little bandage heal in here that came in clutch once the remaining group caught up to us. And thankfully, we managed to get away to safety. After our run-in with the ogre inhabitants, it was time for us to find and speak with the dwarf, Theldarin, who was the main reason we came to this zone in the first place. After him basically calling us stupid for trying to summon the spirit of Misrael? Someone, one of the two. In the first place, he essentially said we crapped the bed and it was time for us to clean it up. So he gave us the mission to summon and defeat Misrael and imprison her in her tomb once again. Unfortunately, this quest was a level 50 elite requirement and was going to start that insane event that we helped participate in earlier. So we're going to put that on the back burner for now. After being called a dummy by the dwarf, I hit level 42 and I completed the rest of the remaining quests in the Badlands. And we were once again back to our orcish homelands. It feels like I've been stuck in the Eastern Kingdoms for years up until this point. After traveling through the Barrens, we entered into the next questing zone, which was Dustwallow Marsh, a spooky swampland that was filled to the brim with ravenous dragonkin. It was here that I arrived at the village of Breckenwall and had my first run-in with the ogres. Well, the first ogres that didn't want to kill me and throw me in a burning cauldron for stew meat. Now, the majority of the quests in this zone were actually just go and kill a bunch of things, except for one. One that sent me on an hour-long journey of killing these little whelplings in search of 30 different items that had an extremely low drop rate. And it was on this killing journey that I ran into the warrior named Cjbeards. We banded together to slay a shit ton of these dragonkins. And during our incredibly long questing journey, he eventually asked me if I would consider joining his guild. And up until this point, I had only been spammed randomly out of the blue to join guilds, like a bunch of spam-risk calls asking about my truck's extended warranty. So I said sure, why not? This is an organic proposal, and it's not out of the blue randomly. So that meant we were no longer guildless. We are now a part of the legendary guild, Noggenfogger Enjoyers. After joining the guild, it was time for us to get back to work. Get back to destroying the whelplings that were trying to take refuge in Wormbog. Eventually, we found the last remaining pieces, and I stayed behind and helped Cjbeards finish up his last quest. Then it was back to the village for the quest turn-ins. After turning in the quest, I moved on to what was quite possibly one of the easiest ones I've ever done. You basically just follow this ogre right over to a close-by encampment, and in the encampment was a human, which basically was just a few back-and-forth arguments between the ogre and the human until we were surprise attacked by a band of Theramore soldiers, who unsuccessfully tried to kill the ogre and I. Unfortunately, they did manage to kill the human in the process. And yeah, that was it to the marshes to try and kill an ogre war chief who needed to be taken down a peg. So I recruited the help of a nearby mage by the name of Bosch to try and take down this monstrosity. And well, this happened. Oh god, am I gonna get Bosch killed? Oh Bosch, no! No, I'm sorry, Bosch, no! So obviously that didn't go as planned, but thankfully it was only moments later and we had another chance with the help of a hunter named Wadi. And this time around, with some more experience, things went a little bit differently. This time the plan was simple. Let the hunter's pet do the tanking while I do the spanking, and throw in a couple interrupts and slowdowns to try and sneak in a few bandage heals onto his courageous gorilla. Things started off good, but as time progressed, the fight started to get more and more nerve-wracking as the ogre hit his enrage phase, and it started to look as if the gorilla was on his last leg. And then, out of nowhere, came the help of a druid. And with his heals, we were able to send the ogre running off to his mommy and the quest turn-in. And with the quest turn-in, we were level 43. This also meant that it was once again back to the Eastern Kingdoms for us, my friends. It was time for us to enter the Alterac Mountains and quickly finish off the 2 or 3 quests that were available in that zone. After killing off the Yeti Frostmaw in a cave and helping out a level 33 warrior, we then went on to kill off a bunch of elite ogres, which, well, definitely had its fair share of close calls. I finally ended my time in Alterac by destroying this Syndicate mage named Baron Vardis for a wanted quest, and I handed in his head back at the village of Terran Mill as proof. It was time for us to go back to the place that does something to me, my friends. The place where I lose all my sense of morality, and well, if I'm being honest, I kind of become a piece of... I wanted my final stay in Stranglethorn Vale to be as quick as possible, because even outside of the run-ins with the Alliance, I genuinely do not enjoy the quests in this place. We started off this Stranglethorn speedrun by killing a couple troll warlords for their heads. I also found out that there is definitely no love lost between the different tribes of the trolls, as I was constantly being sent out to dispatch of the indigenous bands of trolls in the hundreds on the search for different items and basically just to cull down their numbers. I ended up joining up with this band of other hordes who helped with this because these bad boys can pack a punch, and they are super quick to overwhelm you. Now, after finishing slaughtering the trolls, it was time for us to get back to helping Ted Nugent and his cronies hunt down all the animals of the jungle. First on the list was the legendary panther named Bagthera. Once I found him, it was night-night for the kitty, as I quickly invited this horde just in time, so we didn't have to go through the pain of finding him like I did. See? I'm not a complete dick all the time. Okay, maybe I am, because like 3 minutes later, I spent 10 minutes stranding this hunter on an island and sending some, well, less than nice gestures his way. But don't worry, guys, I didn't kill him. And it was at this time, I decided to get extremely cocky and try and take on the raptor boss all by myself, which I'm sure you guys could have guessed is not a good idea at all. And although I actually almost had him, he ended up running me down and eating my booty cheeks as I tried to get away. Within a few moments, I had a group assembled and it was time to try again. And this is where we ended up actually teaming up with Putrilda, the rogue from all the way back in the beginning. What a small world of Warcraft. Together, this dinosaur stood absolutely no chance and was promptly sent back to extinction. On the way back to turn in the quest, I ran into this degenerate night elf and had to swiftly put an end to his naked escapades. With every other creature completely mastered, it was time for us to slay the king of the jungle, and take his throne. After a brief fight with the Alliance, laying claim to the tiger, I ended up having to swap layers with this priest to try and put an end to the king's rule. And man, I gotta say, this kitty and his band of kittens absolutely tore us up. We barely made it out of there alive. I had no idea that within mere seconds we were going to be overrun with furballs. The poor lowly orc warrior who stepped into these jungles at the start of this episode was not the same as the one who was leaving. A new king of the jungle had been crowned, my friends, and I made a promise to be a good and just ruler, one that even my enemies can look up to as a staple of honor and humility. It was time for us to say goodbye to this jungle once and for all, and leave the adventures and the mysteries it contains for the next generation of heroes to conquer. Now, after saying goodbye to the jungles once and for all, it was time to take a break from questing, if not for anything other than what little sanity I had left. By now, we were level 44, and it was time for us to enter into an archaeological dig site that was masquerading as a dungeon. It was time to return to the Badlands and enter Uldaman. And god dang do I love being a tank sometimes, guys. It normally takes like 3 seconds for me to find a group of adventurers and get into a dungeon. Thankfully, this time I found a very capable group that had Uldaman completely figured out, which was very helpful because I would have been lost as shit eventually. After wiping out the different collections of enemies such as trogs, dwarves, and sentient statues, including one trog who decided to try and claim my title as king. Slowly but surely, we made our way through this impressively long dungeon until reaching the final boss, Arcadus. And damn, dude, that's a pretty cool name. Now, this guy was a tough son of a bee, I'm not gonna lie. The fight mechanically was fairly simple, however, this giant could hit like a Mack truck, which wasn't too big of an issue for us, as our healer was fairly skilled. The challenge, however, came into play once he started summoning multiple stone statues that were extremely attracted to my healer. Like that strange stalker level of attraction, where they just felt like they belonged together. It felt like my taunts were useless in trying to pull them off of poor Joshimu, which eventually resulted in his untimely demise. Which, thank God he was a shaman with reincarnation. I would have felt horrible about him having to walk all the way back. It was then time to take revenge against Arcadus and put him down to rest for good. And with his defeat, he dropped the Stone Slayer, a badass two-handed sword that was next up on my list of upgrades. That's right, my friends. At level 44, we had finally replaced the Whirlwind Axe that we've had for almost 15 levels. I honestly had grown so accustomed to it that I couldn't bear the thought of selling it. So now it sits tightly inside my bank, where they'll probably stay forever. After completing Uldaman, it was now time for us to venture south to the eerie lands of Duskwood that definitely were inspired by a couple Stephen King books. Which honestly, for the first time, I kind of felt a tinge of jealousy at the Alliance for having such a cool zone to quest in. I did have to stop and stretch my legs for a bit after the long journey that we've been on. Then it was time for us to cut through Deadwind Pass and make our way over to the next questing zone, the Swamp of Sorrows, very reminiscent of Dustwallow Marsh. I actually enjoyed the aesthetic look of the zone, and the quests were all very simple and straightforward. Go here and kill these so that you can collect this, kill a bunch of murlocs, and collect some ancient troll artifacts. We also did this escort quest that had very questionable pathing. I mean, after it, I had absolutely no questions as to why this guy was caught in the first place. He literally gets broken out of his cage, and his plan to escape is to run straight through the camp of people who captured him. After getting him to safely and turning in all the other quests, it was time for us to hit our goal for the episode, level 45. The journey from level 35 to 45 has been one of the craziest ones yet. We have accomplished so much in the lands of Azeroth up until this point. We have officially passed the halfway point in terms of experience, and we are now reaching the higher echelons of our journey together. The next leg of the journey shall see us reaching higher goals and accolades as we reach one step closer to the final leg of our adventure. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Like always, I appreciate you all so very much, especially the ones who make it this far, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And with all that said, this is Deadmans, and I'll see you in the next video.